I was told that I was terrible at doing podcasts. No big surprise there. This is the worst true crime podcast on the internet, after all. I thought, maybe I am fucking terrible. Maybe I should quit this nonsense and stop kidding myself. So earlier this week, I retired. I decided to stop making podcasts and try my hand at becoming a world-famous rapper instead. So I spent a couple of hours immersing myself in the world of hardcore hip-hop, and I came up with this. And it's called Sex, Drugs, and Guns. Sex, drugs, and guns, yeah, sex, drugs, and guns. Gotta get me some sex, drugs, and guns. Oh, yeah, bitch, yeah, bitch, yeah, bitch. Sex, guns, and drugs. I just can't get enough of those sex, guns, and drugs. Yeah, bitch. Yeah, bitch. Yeah. Oh, yeah, bitch. Sex, drugs, and guns. Sex, drugs, and guns. I gotta get me some of those sex, drugs, and guns. Oh, yeah, bitch. Oh, yeah. So as you can tell, it turns out I'm even worse at rapping than I am at podcasting. So I'm pleased to announce I'm coming out of retirement and will continue being your hapless host for the worst true crime podcast ever, Evil Done Badly. I know all three of you faithful listeners started to panic there for a second, but we are not going away. I mean, it's going horribly, so why stop now? This week's episode was suggested by Curtis G. So thanks to him for that. You may not know it, but you hear Curtis G's contribution to the show every week here on Evil Done Badly. He is the kazoo virtuoso who has generously provided us with our theme song, which we will hear now in a minute. And we have another Evil Done Badly first for you this week. There's no murder in this episode. It's not quite as evil as the last two episodes, but it is done quite badly. Now, those two last episodes were quite yucky. This one is a more fun, loopy episode and no one gets murdered. But there's definitely some crime involved, and it gets quite wacky. There's also going to be a couple of listener questions at the end, so be sure to stick around for that. I hope you like this episode's pleasant change of pace because, well, if you don't like it, I'm not sure I can take any more insults. If I had to retire again, God fucking knows what I'll attempt to do next. It probably won't turn out well. And in the meantime, if anyone sees a job opening for a professional beverage taster, please let me know. And I was just kidding about not being able to take any more insults. Bring 'em on, and cue the theme song. This episode is brought to you by Studs Muffins. You like muffins? Of course you do. What could make a muffin better? Well, I'm glad you asked. All our muffins are hand-baked and served by sweaty, middle-aged, shirtless men who may or may not be covered in back hair. They don't wear gloves, but they're made with love, baby. Studs Muffins. The best time you can have getting your recommended daily intake of brand fiber. Saturday's special is super sweaty. Come on down. Get here quick before the Board of Health shuts us down. And if you're not already, join up to the Wide World of Paranormal Investigations group on Facebook where your friend, Gerard H., will keep you mysteriously entertained. Now back to the story of Marvin John Heemeyer. Marvin John Heemeyer was a very handy guy. He was born in 1951 and operated a muffler repair shop and lived in Grand Lake, Colorado. According to neighbors, he was a likable dude and would bend over backwards for anyone. No one ever mentioned whether or not he would bend over forwards, but that's neither here nor there. He was also kind of fond of this God guy who lives in the sky. Keep that in mind. He'll be extra righteous later on. As likable as he was, he would, however, have to be slightly less likable when people refused to pay the repair bills for his services. Apparently, he threatened some dude about a $124 bill. And well, I don't blame him. I've dealt with enough people to know that the only way of getting money out of most of them, rightful or otherwise, is to intimidate them into submission. I'm not a very scary guy, so in other words, I've never been able to get any money out of anybody. I tried robbing some old people once, but they scared the crap out of me. Mugging old people is a good way to get your ass kicked, so don't do it. Anyways, back to Marvin. Apart from the odd disagreement about auto repairs, he was seen as a generally affable guy. Now, affable just means good-natured. I had to look it up on Google, and I figured I'd define it for you in case you didn't know either. So, he seems pretty swell. Back before he owned his muffler shop, in 1992, Heemeyer bought a 2-acre section of land in Granby, Colorado. He bought it from a trust company that specialized in selling land that had been previously foreclosed on. So he got it cheap. He paid about $42,000 for it, with the intentions of setting up his muffler shop on it. So he sets up his muffler shop, and by all accounts, he was a fantastic welder. Somewhere along the way, he gets an offer on some of his land, and he decides to sell it for $250,000. This offer came from a concrete company, and that sounds good, but then he starts waffling around on the price. Eventually, his asking price climbs upwards of $1 million. The concrete company says that's not a very affable thing to do and tells him to stop being a cunt about it. They would eventually settle somewhere in the middle, probably closer to the $250,000, but it was still way more than Marvin originally paid for it. And that's all good, but then the zoning issues start. Old affable Marvin finds out that dealing with Granby City Hall involves beating your way through mountains of red tape with a plastic spoon. He didn't like where the concrete company wanted to put their processing plant. He found it inconvenient, so he asked them not to do that. The concrete people looked at him, stone-faced, and said, "Piss off, we're going to put our processing plant right here, and City Hall says that's okay by them, so you can suck it." Or something like that. Naturally, tensions began to grow, and Marvin started to make a nuisance of himself around the community. Of course, City Hall began to go out of their way to be assholes right back at him, but according to Marvin, they were the assholes first. In order to annoy Marvin, the town came up with some bullshit rule that Heemeyer's septic tank wasn't connected properly to the sewer system and decided to fine him. Now, the reason that Heemeyer's septic system wasn't up to snuff was, get this, was that the construction being done by the concrete company shagged it all up on him. So he begrudgingly paid the $250 fine, and it was all the concrete company's fault, and no fucking wonder he was routed at them. This bad blood would drag on for about 10 years. That's plenty of time for the sheen of affability to drizzle out of your soul. Good old Marvin was good and pissed off and sold off the rest of his land and decided to wash his hands of the whole thing and move away. Except he didn't wash anything or go anywhere. It was then he and God hatched a plan. Old Marvin took his money and bought a bulldozer, a Komatsu D335A. I hope that means something to you, because I have no idea what that is. I'm picturing some sort of a tractor, or maybe a Zamboni. I'm Canadian after all, and I don't know anything about heavy equipment. I'm assuming that if I tried to lift this heavy equipment, I would find it quite difficult, but I'm not very strong. Either way, Marvin does know about tractors. He's also quite good at welding, which involves sticking pieces of metal to other pieces of metal. What's a big hunk of rolling metal? Well, a tractor. What does Marvin do? He spends the next year attaching thick plates of metal to his big rolling hunk of metal. He tricks out his tractor with homemade armored plating and reinforces the walls with slabs of concrete. If it wasn't heavy enough equipment before, well, it's fucking heavy now. The armor turns out to be over a foot thick and impervious to small arms fire and explosion resistant. Now, why would Marvin need an explosion resistant tractor? Because he was secretly building himself a big ugly tank and he was ready to do some damage with it. It's kind of amazing that he managed to keep that kind of a secret in a small town like this. You'd think one of the neighbors would have caught on to what he was up to and screamed out, "Hey, what you doing, Merv? Looks like you're building a tank there." "Oh, no, there, Mr. Jenkins, no, it's nothing. It's just a Zamboni." "Oh, okay, Merv, have fun." He's grumpy and sneaky. And apparently even he was surprised that he managed to pull it off without the nosy neighbors figuring it out. So it took him over a year to build it, and when it was done, he was still pissed off. This man can surely hold a grudge, and he's incredibly resourceful. The amount of effort this requires blows my mind. I would have got tired and quit halfway through lugging the first bag of concrete, for fuck's sakes. Heemeyer didn't stop with just armoring the thing. He installed an air conditioner to keep himself cool and would steer it with monitors connected to video cameras on the outside of the tank. The cameras were outfitted with bulletproof glass and compressed air to blow the dust off of them. It had 3 ports for guns, just in case running over stuff wasn't deadly enough. This guy thought of fucking everything. So on June 4th, 2004, Heemeyer would go right off the deep end and spend 2 hours driving his tank around smashing into things. He first ran into his former business and the concrete plant next to it. Wow, no surprise there. He leveled a newspaper office. This newspaper was, in particular, the one that had said mean things about him in the editorial pages. He pounded the crap out of the former mayor's house and destroyed the hardware store of a man he had recently sued. If this guy didn't like you, he was coming for you. This is fucking absolutely bonkers. This guy attempted to destroy his whole town with a homemade tank, and he almost pulled it off. If this was a video game, you'd say it was the coolest thing ever. But it was real life, and he damaged 13 buildings in total. He scared a lot of people shitless and did about $7 million in damage. That's about $1 gazillion in today's money. Fortunately, no one was injured, but it's not because he didn't try to hurt anybody. He did use his guns in attempts to blow up propane tanks and power transformers. These explosions would have definitely put lives in danger. As far as I know, he was unable to ignite any of them, and there were no explosions. But he made a terrible mess anyways. He did fire a couple of shots at people who tried to stop him. One of which was driving his own tractor, but it was no match for Marvin's big rolling hunk of metal, and a patrol officer. He was relentless, but not a terribly great shot, and no one was hurt. Authorities were unable to damage the tank with gunfire or explosives. They were running low on options and considered bringing in a helicopter to fire at it, or getting some anti-tank missiles from the military in hopes of pummeling Heemeyer into submission. Just when things looked really bleak, they took a bit of a turn for the silly. Now, Heemeyer was relentless, and he showed no signs of stopping until he got to the hardware store. Now, his tank was leaking a lot of fluid by now. It had the shit knocked out of it, but it was still going. And he bashed his way into the front door of the hardware store, and part of the floor gave way, and half the tank wound up in the basement. His tank wasn't able to climb the stairs back up out of the hole, so he just sat there for about another minute, considering what to do. Once he realized it was hopeless, and his reign of destruction was pretty much over, he put his .357 caliber handgun to his head and pulled the trigger. Now, you didn't think we'd get through this whole episode without someone getting killed, did you? He's dead. He never made it. He did it himself in one last fuck you to the town and wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of capturing him. It took them 12 hours to cut his body out of the tank with an acetylene torch. They decided to dismantle the tank afterwards and distribute the pieces to various junkyards around the state. They figured if they left it together, people would be looting it for souvenirs, so they just up and made it disappear. This tank was dubbed the Killdozer afterwards, even though nobody but Heemeyer was killed. Heemeyer was unhinged enough that I think it's fair to say he would have killed somebody if they got in his way or if his aim was steady enough. If he didn't like you, I'm pretty sure he wanted you dead. This town just got extremely lucky that there were no injuries. Now, we know that Heemeyer was pissed off and he had a beef with the city council. But what could drive him to such lengths that he tried to bulldoze the whole town? Well, he recorded 2.5 hours worth of audio tape containing his rambling manifesto. This manifesto explained in detail why he came to the conclusion that the most reasonable course of action for him was, indeed, to smash up the whole town. He mailed the tapes to his brother before he encapsulated himself in the mega tractor and set off in search of vengeance. His brother would forward the tapes to the FBI after Marvin went reasonably apeshit. In the recordings, Marvin would go on to say that God built me for this job, and I think God will bless me to get the machine done, to drive it, to do the stuff that I have to do. Wow. Whatever pressure good-natured old Marvin was under, it drove him completely nutso, and he completely lost touch with reality. He was no longer good-natured and absolutely delusional. Here's another enlightening quote. Quote, God bless me in advance for the task that I'm about to undertake. It is my duty. God has asked me to do this. It's a cross that I'm going to carry, and I'm carrying it in God's name. End quote. According to him, God didn't want him to have a family because it would distract him from making the Killdozer. It's hard to plan destruction when you gotta make Kraft dinner and weenies for the youngins. Holy shit. What a crackpot. I mean, I'm all for sticking it to the man, but destroying a whole town because you're upset and you've been chosen by God seems more than a little misguided. Investigators found a written list of targets that Heemeyer had planned on crushing. All of the buildings he destroyed were on the list, plus there were names of people that he considered unreasonable. Oddly, he had the Catholic Church on his list, but he didn't wind up smashing it. God probably threatened to send him to hell if he touched it. I don't know how that stuff works. Maybe he just didn't get around to it. Either way, Marvin still considered himself a reasonable man, despite the destruction. He justified it by saying, sometimes unreasonable men. No, was it? He justified it by saying, sometimes reasonable men must do unreasonable things. Curious people still go to Granby expecting to see devastation, but the place has been rebuilt, and the only sign of Marvin and his Killdozer are the local legends. On the internet, Marvin is viewed by many as some hero-like little man who stood up to the big bad government. Many thinks he's just a dangerous lunatic. Either way, him and his tractor will not be soon forgotten, as at least 2 movies have been made about the whole mess. There's a Russian movie about the incident from 2014 called Leviathan, and in 2019, Netflix produced a documentary about him called Tread. It's a crazy story, one that was just begging to be put onto celluloid. Yes, indeed. What a story. I had an unreasonably great time telling it, and I hope you enjoyed it. It was a nice, breezy episode for your ear holes. Next week's episode will be a little more bloody. I think we've got time for a couple listener questions. Dana Dinkeldumper asks, why do you make a podcast that no one listens to? Well, Dana, it's easy. All of my friends are imaginary, and my whole existence takes place in some make-believe world that my brain dreamed up. So I have no problem pretending that I have an audience full of millions of adoring fans. Easy as that. Thanks for writing in, Dana. Billy Bumbleboner asks, can I have your home address so I can kill you? Well, Billy, that's 42 Squeak Street in Willoughby, Washington. In the meantime, all I ask of you is that you give me a couple weeks' notice of when you're coming. That way I can write an episode of Evil Done Badly based on my own demise. Should be good. Thanks for writing in, Billy. And that's it for this episode of Evil Done Badly. I'm reasonably glad to have you along, and I hope to see you next time. If you would like to suggest future show topics, I can be reached by email at evildonebadly@gmail.com or on Instagram at evildonebadly. It's been a great time so far, and I'm excited that you're following along with me on this journey as we bumble our way through the darkest reaches of humanity. I am your hapless host, Dick, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye!